Almost 5 years ago, in Japan, Persona 5 made history by being the first game ever to make turn-based combat exciting. And now, after over a year of waiting for it to release in the West, Persona 5 Strikers has made history by being the first game ever to make Warriors combat interesting. I wasn't expecting much from this game, honestly. I thought I would enjoy it based on both my time with the demo last year and the fact that it's, more Persona 5, but I didn't think it would be an incredibly memorable experience. So, after I played the whole game, what do I think now?
The game is fun.
Everything is here. The presentation, the voice acting, the fun characters, the creative settings, the jamming soundtrack. Oh my god, the soundtrack! Even the theming is a logical step forward as a Persona 5 sequel, and even in terms of the whole Persona series, which has always been about desires. If Persona 5 was about stealing the desires of evil people, for this game to be about stealing back the desires of people that were stolen by not quite so evil people is just so clever to me. We basically just got another mainline Persona game with a different gameplay genre. And I should mention a different gameplay genre that I'm not even typically a fan of. I was never that into Warriors games. They were always fun for a couple hours, but I always lose interest eventually. I think a great deal of this game's appeal compared to other Warriors games is that it has a real, actual story. And not just the typical Warriors fan service crossover nonsense, but the gameplay changes are not to be overlooked either. A lot of the stuff this game does that differs from the typical Warriors formula are exactly the same things that make me like it that much more than a typical Warriors game. The Persona combat is such a natural fit for this genre, way more than I would have expected, and all the various buffs, moves, and even the assumed combat styles of all the characters are translated over so effortlessly that this game feels like the real thing. Battling in this game feels just like the actual fights that the Phantom Thieves had always been doing, just not made abstract by turn-based combat anymore. And that's incredibly impressive. To take a turn-based game, which is arguably as far from a warrior-style game as you can get, and turn it into one without any sort of disconnect at all. Something I noticed is that a lot of the mechanics in Strikers are almost reskins of typical Warriors mechanics. Like the weaknesses in all attacks from mini-bosses are reminiscent of the weak point smash attacks from Hyrule Warriors, and each character's Showtime attack is basically just a special attack from those games, but they're tweaked and different enough to where it feels fresh. So much so that I'm willing to bet a lot of players didn't even realize they've been playing a little bit more of a typical Warriors game than they thought. Basically what I'm trying to say is that Persona 5 Strikers has basically set Omega Force forwards about 5 years in terms of innovation. Even just being able to play as all the Phantom Thieves bar Futaba for the whole time you're in the metaverse is a selling point on its own, and seeing them do things that normally only Joker could do is a real treat. The Phantom Thieves in combat are really well designed too. I kind of thought the only thing differentiating them would be their Persona move, but oh my god, I was so wrong. Every party member really feels super different from the next. Like, impressively so. There's no mistaking An, Sophia, or Makoto for each other, even though they have fairly similar niches within the group of magic-using support characters because their movesets are so distinctive. And they're all incredibly fun to play, with one glaring exception I'll get to later, but the point is, the gameplay of Persona 5 Strikers is absolute fire. And while I'm not exactly suggesting that this style of gameplay become the future of the series, it's definitely a breath of fresh air and just straight undiluted fun. And oh my god, I can't believe I've gone this far without really digging into the story because it is really good. It's definitely treading some familiar ground, but for the most part these parallels really do serve the story. The original Persona 5 has some higher highs, but Strikers is so consistent that I honestly like it more than the original Persona 5, or at least as much as the original. Obviously, I still like Royal the most, are you fucking kidding me? Who do you think you're talking to? But I don't even really want to compare them that much like everyone on Twitter seems to be doing, because that would be doing both games a disservice. It's way more fun to just like two things, rather than trying to compare them. And there is a lot to like about Strikers. This game is just really tightly written. I think it owes most of this to being a sequel, to be fair, because it doesn't have nearly as much to set up. But the story of Strikers is really just a thrill ride all the way to the end, both in terms of gameplay as well as story and characters. The reason I like all the less serious goofing off scenes in this game as opposed to the ones in Persona 4 is that, for one, the ones in this game are actually funny, and also, this game is supposed to be a vacation. They can't be hunting down jails all the time, they need some moments to breathe, especially since this game takes place over the course of just over a month as opposed to the full year of most Persona games. But the shorter length doesn't mean there's not a lot happening in the story, far from it, and the new party members especially are real highlights, since the Phantom Thieves are established characters by now and we don't need to waste any time being introduced to these people. So the fact that they only have to set up 2 team members this time, Sophia and Zenkichi, allows them both to shine. I'll get to Sophia later, but can we just talk about him? I totally thought Zenkichi was just going to be a boring and serious cop character, but no, he's a funny motherfucker with lots of sass, a ton of personality, and is probably one of the best party members in the entire Persona series. Yeah, but this is totally just an average spin-off, guys. Definitely. One thing I know is completely not this game's fault, but I still can't quite ignore, is that I really wish Yoshizawa was in this game. Of course I know why she really couldn't have been, but it's just very, very sad to me that she missed this chance to become a real member of the Phantom Thieves family. This game could have made her one of the girls, and now I really don't see her ever getting that opportunity again. Obviously that isn't a point against the game exactly, but I just can't help but feel really sad. No, well, no point complaining about it, I suppose. One legitimate problem I have with this game's story, and don't worry, it's fairly minor all things considered, is that there's a few instances of pretty disappointing missed opportunities. This is kind of the bad thing about this game being more than the average spin-off. If it was just an average game, I wouldn't think about it this much, but since it's this good, the missed opportunities stand out all the more. Akane being completely out of the story after her jail ends is such a bummer, especially since I was really looking forward to a scene where she learns her new best friends are actually the Phantom Thieves, but that scene just never happened. And not to get too big into details yet, but the villain who ends up topping this list had a ton of potential to become even more of an iconic character, and also one of the villains near the bottom of the list, funnily, but both of their limited story presences leads to them falling a little short. But again, the fact that I just said one of them tops this list, and the other is not in the bottom at all, means that they're still really fucking good in spite of that. Again, like I said, this game owes a lot of why its story works so well to being a sequel, but considering that's what a sequel should do, I think it's quite fantastic that the game succeeds spectacularly to this extent. It's not super ambitious in the writing department, and the ending missed some of the wow factor from the original games, but those are minor issues, and they don't detract at all from how enjoyable this game is to just sit back and play. If you really want a meaningless numbered score, 8 out of 5 it sucks. With that mini review done, let's move on to the real meat of this video, the rankings. I honestly didn't think ranking the jails would be all that exciting at all. It just seemed like the go-to thing to do for a new release, but after playing this game, I'm actually really pumped to share my thoughts with you guys. I have a lot more to say than I expected.
Let's go.
Number 8, Sapporo's Jail, Marikyo Hyodo. Yeah, you probably thought it was going to be Okinawa, didn't you? I want to preface this by saying that I don't think any jail in this game is outright bad. This whole game is, on the whole, very consistent, but Sapporo's Jail is definitely the one I feel the most about. To give credit where it's due, this is definitely a very aesthetically nice jail. There's a lot more effort put into reskinning the city than in something like, say, Shibuya, and the music is top-notch as it always is. I love how it's so waltzy and glittery. But the biggest problem I have is that this is the third jail in the game, and nothing has really changed yet. At this point, the formula is starting to become painfully predictable, especially since they're not even trying to hide it anymore with the ice walls that only open once you clear a prison keep. It's less noticeable in Persona 5 because that had nothing changed by the third dungeon either, but the palaces were way less formulaic in structure than the jails are. At least the mini-bosses in this jail are kind of fun, and snowboarding is always a treat, but I think the biggest issue is that Marikyo Hyodo herself just doesn't do it for me. I don't know how much of this has to do with the fact that she's the third villain in the game that uses the exact same formula, but I just had a really hard time getting as emotionally invested in this jail as any of the other ones. This is probably not helped by the fact that the setup is extremely similar to Okumura's palace in Persona 5. And, don't get me wrong, I totally understand that this is the point, to create parallels that correspond with each Phantom Thief. Why did I really just say Phantom Thief? To create parallels that correspond with each Phantom Thief, but I think this is a case where they may have taken it too far. Mariko is super similar to Okumura as a villain. Haru even has similar feelings about her that she did when infiltrating her father's palace. And as a result, I don't think this jail really brings out too much new. Not from Haru or from Mariko herself. That scene with Joker and Haru at the fountain was pretty good, but that's about all that stuck out to me, honestly. Mariko's lockkeeper is kind of missing something for me as well. It's really difficult to put this into words, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I get a lot less concrete emotions from Mariko than I do from the other monarchs, and hell, even most of the palace rulers in Persona 5. The game doesn't want you to hate her, but at the same time, I have a hard time empathizing with her as much as the characters seem to, and as much as the game seems to want you to. Also, I am just incredibly tired of the trope of a character being fat as shorthand for greed. It's not a huge deal in terms of the jail's other issues, but it is something I couldn't ignore, especially since it's emphasized as an ugly trait in the case of Shadow Mariko, considering that Mariko in reality is not fat, which... not cool, bro. I get that it's supposed to be symbolism, but they could have tried way harder. I really don't have much else to say about Mariko, honestly. She has by far the least stage presence out of every villain in the game, so I'm not sure what else I can even bring up about her. The emotional resolution with Haru was pretty touching, but it was kind of hampered by the fact that, again, I didn't really feel much for most of this story. The boss is fine, definitely not the best in the game, but all the bosses in this game are good, so it's fine. Soloing the last eighth of her health bar with Joker with no SP was a pretty memorable experience though, I'll give it that. What is not fine, however, is the fact that the boss almost requires you to use Haru and her team for that psychic tornado attack that just chews through her stamina bar. Normally I like this. Using weaknesses to encourage you to use the party members the jail focuses on is very smart design, but the problem is, Haru is not fun to play. At all. I'm honestly dumbfounded that Haru was in the same game as Ryuji, who is a slow character like her, yes, but he feels responsive. And most importantly, there's a lot of shit you can do with him besides just smack the enemy in the face. He can charge attacks that have varying effects, one of which is a massive slam, another is a wide swing that allows him to follow up, and another unleashes a huge electric attack, and not to mention his attacks actually move him a fair amount, and he can dodge and move around while charging. Haru just swings her fucking axe around. She does have a couple of fancy psychic attacks that I like, but for the most part, her entire moveset is just varying degrees of big axe attack. In addition, she is about as mobile as a piece of broccoli. The fact that you have to unlock her 4th master art for something that should have been a part of her kit from the very start is just the final nail in the coffin to me. She is a very good punished character, don't get me wrong. If an enemy is recovering from a move, she can do massive damage. She does have a niche, it's just not a very fun niche. And Ryuji is right there! After Sapporo's jail, I seriously just never used Haru again, and any shred of guilt I felt about that disappeared when Zenkichi joined the party, who is like Ryuji in the sense that he's a slow character who is still fun to play. The Fury and Life Drain mechanics add a real back and forth dynamic to playing as him, and he even has some simpler combos as Haru that are just better, like strictly better. That's 2 characters that fill Haru's all-out offensive role in a much more interesting way. Don't misunderstand me, I like Haru, okay? I really do, but this game is trying so hard to change my mind with how boring she is to play. Not to mention that I feel like she's just kind of off in this game. Most of the characters are very true to how they are in the original game, even if it does fall into that trap of, this character liked food, that means it's now an integral part of their personality, with Ryuji and ramen. In the original game, he just likes ramen, but in this game, it's like a cornerstone of his personality. But it's kind of funny, so it's not a huge deal. But Haru strikes me as kind of wrong. There isn't any, major moments that weird me out about her characterization or anything, but she just feels different. I feel like Haru wasn't this dense in the original game. I don't think she's dumb enough to not realize that her driving was what shook everyone up so much in the scene in Zenkichi's safe house. I realize this is kind of a tangent from Sapporo's jail, but Haru is just a big association I have with it, since I had to use Haru for most of the jail to keep her at a high enough level to not die instantly to the boss. And since this is the bottom spot in the ranking, I feel like this is the best place to get most of the negative stuff out of the way. And also, there really isn't much else to talk about regarding Sapporo's jail. The setup isn't that interesting, the villain is average at best, the gameplay area has its moments, but that's not enough to stop the growing sense of fatigue and worry that the formula may be running out of steam. Even the stuff I can admit is good in hindsight was still kind of soured for me by that same sense of fatigue I had from the jail formula at this point in the game, and unfortunately that just makes me have more of a negative impression on Sapporo's jail than any of the others, which are either early enough to still be exciting, or do something really unique and different to stand out from the others. The best thing about this jail is this decent showcase of Haru's growth that her interactions with Mariko provide, but that's true for one of the Phantom Thieves in all normal jails, and it's done way better in every single one of them. I honestly got way more out of the single scene with Makoto and Zenkichi in the RV almost directly after this jail than I got out of any of the scenes about the jail itself. So a couple good moments from Haru is unfortunately not enough to get Sapporo's jail out of last place for me. Also, the bonus boss fucking kicked my ass like 10 times until I got more crabs. That gives me even more bad associations with this jail. There are just so many hee-hoes! Number 7. Shibuya's jail. Alice Hiragi. Holy shit, I didn't expect the first jail in the game to be this good. And like, this is second to last on the list. We've already reached the point where the jails stop being mediocre and start being ones I have at least one or two really, really strong takeaways from. And you want to talk about takeaways? You want some fucking takeaways? How about the fucking castle mission? That was fan-servicey as hell, with epic shit from all the Phantom Thieves except poor Sophia, who wasn't deemed worthy of the awesome moment, I guess. And Joker taking on a whole army by himself will never not be the coolest shit ever. Aside from that really strong impression, this jail is just good. It's a fair introduction to the concept of jails, and the gameplay doesn't take its time getting set up either. After the admittedly somewhat lengthy tutorial, you're pretty much just allowed to go. And I'm so happy for that, because this game wastes no time being fun as hell. However, in terms of enemy designs and even the boss, they're all very basic. Not that that's a bad thing for a first dungeon, but it just doesn't have the same wow factor that some of the other jails have, apart from the castle mission, which I just said is fucking awesome and probably the best one in the game. In addition, Alice is a really fun villain. Even though I don't quite get all the hype around her character, don't get me wrong, she's quite good and definitely has the most stage presence out of all the human monarchs up until... you know who I'm talking about, but she doesn't strike me as some masterpiece of a character, she's just pretty good. Part of this is owed to the fact that her story felt kind of rushed. It felt like the game went from completely vilifying Alice to expecting you to sympathize with her wholeheartedly within, like, 5 minutes. I think this is because the Lockkeeper is basically the only part of the entire arc up until this point that really humanizes her. Aside from some stuff that An says earlier, but to have An be only mildly confused about why Alice is acting so evil to screaming about how poorly she was treated in such a short span of time, it kind of feels like we missed a step along the way. Like, the cores of the prison keeps are fine and all, but those are just hints, they don't really mean anything until we look back in hindsight. Not that that's a huge issue, because the emotional climax of this jail is really solid. I love An as a character, and I especially love that she's just allowed to get pissed as all fuck when it's warranted. Like, y'all who are still trying to tell me Ryuji is the angry one need to look at this. I think the parallels of An seeing herself in Alice work really well, especially in comparison to Mariko, who more closely resembles the villain of Haru's arc in Persona 5. While Alice does have some remnants of Kamoshida's creepiness in there, you can see much more of the person behind the evil, which is a bit of a theme in this game, and An not allowing Alice to fall even deeper into her villainy because they both admire each other so much is really compelling. This is the best part of Strikers. It's straight up. It's a sequel that knows it's a sequel, and it takes the places these characters are in now into account with its writing. The Phantom Thieves have become well-adjusted people after the events of Persona 5, and are now using their own experiences to help others who never had the support system they did. It's a bit like they're facing shadows of their own, versions of themselves that they might have become had they not been in the place they were at the time, and it's a brilliant choice from a writing standpoint to make these villains like this, even if the formula brought on by the jails doesn't always make for the most complete arcs. Shibuya's jail is like the first thing I think of when I think about a jail in this game, both good and bad. Fun combat, memorable character moments, and a really outstanding emotional climax that's only dragged down by the strange pacing of the build-up to it.
Wow! If I had a nickel for every time I was
fighting a weirdly sexual bunny monster as the first boss of a Persona 5 spin-off game,
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Number 6. Jail of the Abyss. Kuon Ichinose. Kind of. I'm gonna be honest, I was considering lumping this jail in with the final jail, but ultimately they're different enough to where I think they should be separated. The aesthetics of this jail, while not bad, are a bit too reminiscent of the depths of Mementos for my liking. I get that was the point, but they could have done something a bit more to make it stand out, like maybe a new thematic color or something. I barely consider this a real jail and more like a place for the story to happen. It's very, very short, and the main reason it exists is for the Ichinose reveal, and yeah, I don't have much else to say about it that hasn't already been said. It's pretty cool. Ichinose is cool. She doesn't bring a whole lot new to the table in terms of villains for this series, certainly not compared to the villain who ends up topping this ranking, but she does enough stuff to make her stand out that I can totally see why people like her so much, and I like her too, just not quite to the same extent. Obviously the final boss of Persona 5 Royal still reigns supreme for me, but I like how Ichinose is a very major villain who's also a girl. That hasn't happened very often in this series, so it's cool to see here. I just wish she had a tiny bit more presence throughout the game. Like, the stuff she has is funny, but it kind of feels like a cop-out to make your villain a twist by barely having her in the story until the reveal. Even Adachi was better in that regard. Wait, no, I don't want to do Ichinose dirty like that. Forget I said that last part, okay? This results in the story having to play catch-up by making Ichinose give you 2 big monologues about her backstory and Emma, which the story did not foreshadow in the slightest. I kind of understand keeping Emma a mystery at least, but Ichinose's backstory definitely could have been peppered into the plot more, considering how she's ostensibly been the Phantom Thief's friend ever since Sendai. Another big thing that happens in this jail is Sophia's true awakening, not just to her persona, but to her very own heart. And God, I sound like such a downer. Trust me, I like this jail, okay? I told you that anything from Alice's jail and above were at least good jails, but Sophia's awakening kind of misses the mark for me, just a little bit. I really like Sophia as a character, and I normally hate robot characters, but she grew on me because she has an actual personality and a not robotic voice, which it turns out was all I really needed. I like how she gradually picks up Ryuji's slang over the course of the game, and she's just fun. I like her. This scene on its own is really quite awesome. I love how her mask flashes Pandora before the awakening. That shit is cool, and it's a great empowering moment for Sophia, even if Pandora's design is a bit silly in my opinion. In my opinion though, this moment is dragged down by the fact that, like Ichinose, it suffers from a lack of foreshadowing. So we have to be told everything and have all this information about Sophia dumped on us in just a single scene. I feel like it could have been built up a tiny bit more. I know there are a couple hints here and there, and the voice in Okinawa's jail is a pretty good step, but I think there could have been just a little more foreshadowing about her. Maybe having the research lab have some old files about her or something. That would take a little less of the pressure off of Ichinose's single monologue about her by allowing the characters to guess at Sophia's connection to Emma earlier, and let Sophia's awakening, what is supposed to be a major moment for her character, and what should be the real focus of the scene, breathe a little bit. Still though, I do want to stress that I don't think this is a bad jail. Just looking at it from a broad perspective, it doesn't have very much to offer compared to the other jails, aside from 2 character moments that then lead into the final jail. And those moments are, in the end, strong enough to put it above 2 of the other jails, so like I said, definitely not a bad jail. It just suffers from the lack of build-up. Number 5. Tree of Knowledge. Emma, the Demiurge. As far as final levels go, this is pretty fucking good, but compared to the jails to follow, it's weak as hell. I'm not saying Emma is a bad antagonist, far from it, but this jail just sort of inherently lacks a complex issue, except for the whole free will thing that the game won't stop repeating. It's just another god doing obviously bad things that it perceives as good, and now it's time to stop it. The difference here, and why I think Emma works better than someone like, say, Izanami, is because it makes sense that it's ignoring the real desires of humanity, because it's an AI specifically programmed not to understand the human heart. Because it sees all the struggles humans go through because of their desires, it's only natural that it would come to the conclusion that the removal of all desires is best for humankind. Because it's an AI, it literally cannot comprehend these things. It's sort of like a complete inversion of the Persona 5 Royal villain's endgame, which, regardless if it was intentional or not, I think is really cool. Even with the most understandable motivations out of most of the Persona God final bosses, Demiurge is mostly still a familiar trope for a final villain in the Persona series, though I have to give it points for being executed very well compared to the competition for the most part. Even Yaldabaoth is a little less good than this, but Yaldabaoth had way more going on than just the god itself, so it's still better in my opinion. The actual jail itself, though, is probably the coolest in terms of aesthetics out of the entire game. The Eden motifs, while not quite as incredible as those used in Persona 5 Royal's Final Palace, I'm kind of sensing a theme here, are still awesome, and the music really does just scream Final Dungeon. The gameplay leaves a lot to be desired, though. Once again, this jail is really short, and I don't know if it was because I did all the bonus bosses or what, but the enemies here barely put up a fight at all. Even the final mini-boss couldn't do much to us. And the final boss fight is fucking awesome in concept. Using everyone at once is a really cool idea, but the execution was a bit of a letdown. I was imagining switching between the 3 groups constantly, dealing damage to the boss to stop it from attacking the teams attacking the orbs, and switching to deal with the orbs to interrupt them from buffing and healing the boss. Instead, you do all the fights one after the other. The fights with the orbs are really simple and kind of long and annoying, so it just feels a bit underwhelming to actually play, especially since the fights get easier as they go on rather than harder, which doesn't make sense for a final boss. And then once you finally beat all the orbs, the Demiurge is just kind of a cakewalk. I don't think I got knocked out even once. Unfortunately, my complaints don't end there. The final blow at the very end of the battle was incredibly disappointing. Granted, it kind of had an impossible act to follow, with both Begone and Checkmate being absolutely untouchable cinematic masterpieces. I speak no hyperbole, you know I'm right. But But really, it felt like they didn't know how to touch the greatest of the final blow in Persona 5, so they didn't even try, and just went for pure fan service. The thing is, I wouldn't be disappointed about this if they had actually gone all the way with it. It's framed as an all-out attack, but with the entire team, but it comes with absolutely none of the flair that I expect from all-out attacks. There's no style, no cool effects or anything. It's just a pretty generic cutscene of every Phantom Thief attacking the Demiurge separately. It's cool to look at, I guess, but I thought all-out attacks were supposed to feature the entire team attacking as one, not these independent coup de grace followed by Joker stabbing it in the chest by himself. I would even settle for just having the Take Your Heart logo and the chains come up after the end, where the team does the admittedly badass final pose. You know, like every other all-out attack in the game. I'm sorry, I don't mean to drag down a perfectly adequate final boss for something so small, but this was just super disappointing. Not even the You Are Stronger reprise is enough to save this one for me. Leaving aside what is basically just a glorified nitpick, the reason this jail isn't higher on the list is not because it's bad, it succeeds at most things a good final dungeon should do, but every jail above it was just more memorable and special for one reason or another. I feel sort of bad for putting the Tree of Knowledge so comparatively low considering it's the final dungeon, but I can't in good conscience lowball any of the remaining jails by putting them below it, so I guess it just has to settle for being slightly below the middle of the pack. Number 4. Okinawa's Jail. The thing about Strikers is that, for better or worse, a lot of its ideas are retreads. We've seen how that can work, and we've also seen how that can work a little less well. For the most part, the parallels in this game do work, and they serve the plot in a very good way, especially as a sequel, but it's hard to argue that a little bit of the magic is lost with this kind of writing. Okinawa's Jail transcends this with a single, really striking, new idea. The concept of an abandoned jail where all the shadows are just aimless drifters that still follow the last orders they were given, even in the real world, is honestly really fucking interesting. This may be an even better take on the sin of sloth than the depths of mementos from the original Persona 5, and it's hard to overstate just how bold of a narrative choice this game was, especially considering its placement in the story. You've just spent 3 jails establishing the tone and formula of arcs in this game, and just as the fatigue is setting in, the game slaps you in the face with this almost ethereal place that's unsettling to simply be in, much less explore. The way this part of the game puts you on edge so effortlessly by twisting the formula just enough is nothing short of brilliant. Considering that Shuzo Ubukata's voice is the only thing we get to experience regarding his character, I think his performance is really memorable. Even if the whole tape recordings as exposition idea is very trite at this point, there aren't too many of them, and they do a good enough job of keeping the player in suspense as to what exactly happened here. The biggest set piece of this jail, where Sophia is deemed worthless, is not only a good step forward for her arc, but also Ryuji finally gets to say fuck, so what's not to love about this one? And the music is godlike. Obviously that's to be expected at this point, but like even more godlike than the status quo of this game. It sounds so distant and unnerving. It's really short, waiting for the cable sucks ass, the boss isn't particularly memorable, and the story moves on from this arc pretty quick compared to the other endgame jails, but I have to give props to the only part of this game that's completely, entirely original. Number 3. Sendai's Jail. Ango Natsume. I know, I'm shocked too. Let me explain. When I was playing this jail, I really thought it was going to be near the bottom of the list because it kind of sucks in terms of actually playing it. The prison keeps are a massive pain to get to, and the enemies are pretty annoying, with so many of them resisting physical at this early point in the game. The biggest highlights are the aesthetics and the absolutely hilarious concept of the party being treated like heroes of a C-tier RPG. The Furious Four are so hilariously overacted that it makes me giggle, and the fact that Joker frequently gets equally campy dialogue choices is just so good, dude. That said, I do want to draw extra attention to the music because, like, Sendai kind of just gives it all to you, let's be honest. Both the jail theme and the main city theme are top tier, when most other cities usually have one or the other as a real standout. Still though, I thought maybe that stuff would be enough to save this jail from being at the bottom of the barrel, but definitely wasn't considering putting it any higher than maybe second to last. But then the way this arc ended tied everything up so nicely that I really just couldn't bring myself to rank this jail any lower. The reason this was so surprising and welcome is because up until the ending of this jail, it hadn't done enough to alleviate my biggest concern about the game that had been developing ever since I finished Alice's Jail. Let me back up and explain that real quick in a more broad sense. I think overall my biggest problem with the general structure of Striker's Jails is, while I can't help but miss palaces deep in my heart, even though this game is amazing, is that the approach to making their villains sympathetic can feel very cookie-cutter-esque. Think about it this way. Every one of the main human monarchs of the game have 3 prison keeps, which house sentimental items that give us a clue as to their backstory. Usually these clues are very small and only make sense when viewed in hindsight. Then, after the siege of the monarch's castle and locating the Cage of Desires, we go find the trauma room, find out the whole truth behind the monarch's backstory, and fight the lockkeeper. By this point, the game is expecting you to be as sympathetic towards the monarch as the Phantom Thieves are, and so by the time you go to fight the boss, it's more of an emotional climax than a physical one. And while this approach to villain design is never truly bad, don't get me wrong, it also, by its very nature, is incredibly predictable. I'm not saying I have a problem with predictable stories, they're much better than messy stories, but I have a problem with how, you always know that the monarch is going to have some tragic backstory, and it can sometimes feel like the game isn't exactly always earning it. I mentioned this already, but this was one of the reasons I couldn't rank Alice's or Mariko's jails any higher, because in their cases, I felt like the monarch formula, so to speak, didn't serve them nearly as well as a palace potentially could have. I personally don't think every villain needs to be sympathetic, and the fact that Strikers' formula is so dependent on a villain being sympathetic makes it less special because you're just waiting to hear about the tragic backstory and get it over with. It feels slightly, well, formulaic. Ango Natsume, the monarch of Sendai's jail, does not have this problem in the slightest. The reason I think the monarch formula works so well for Natsume is that it's much easier to tell exactly where his life went wrong, and crucially, how it led to his current state. In the case of Alice, for example, there was never really any big incident that we see that caused her to become an abuser. Instead, her lockkeeper represents her entire past at Shujin Academy as a horrifying amalgamation of all the bullying she ever received. Not that that's inherently bad, mind you, that absolutely makes her sympathetic, and I can see why she makes the leap from being bullied to becoming the bully, but that approach to the backstory makes it a little difficult to pinpoint when and how her character tangibly turned for the worst, and for me that makes it a bit harder to really understand her as a person. But for Natsume, his character progresses so logically from earnest aspiring author to villain because he never truly lost that inspiration and drive to be a creative person. Natsume's lockkeeper represents a single event that completely twisted his mindset on being an author, even though he still genuinely wanted to be a real writer but saw no other choice than to become the villain. The monarchs immediately before and after this jail meant well like he did, but they ultimately lost sight of what they really wanted, while Natsume's ambition was simply understandably warped by a single event that utterly broke his innocence. What I mean to say is, the reason Natsume uses Emma is tied to his character, not his trauma. Even after becoming a villain, all he wants is for people to read his book, even if he goes about doing so in an objectively wrong way. And that just makes him work so much better than the other 2 normal monarchs. Alice used Emma as a way to get back at people, while Mariko used Emma simply to get votes, which kind of runs counter to her past self's earnest care for the people. Natsume's role as a monarch is the most understandable logical extreme of his character out of all the other human monarchs, bar you-know-who, and that makes him feel much more complete as a person, not just a villain. It feels like the jail's formula serves his character, not the other way around. Not to mention that Yusuke has the best role in this jail out of all the other Phantom Thieves in their jails. He gets to express his views on what he believes an artist should be and apply it to Natsume throughout the whole arc, which goes a long way towards humanizing Natsume even before the lockkeeper battle. But all of this isn't even why Sendai's jail is this high on the list. It would be enough to make it go higher, maybe even above the halfway point, but the reason it's at number 3 is solely down to the ending. The boss fight plays out almost identically to the way it did with Alice in terms of the broad strokes, so I was losing hope for anything different to happen, and then the confession scene began. In the typical confession press conference in these games, the villains usually all cry their eyes out because they're so racked with guilt over what they've done, right? Well, Natsume doesn't. He's very composed and lays all his actions bare with a straight face, announcing the end of his writing career, all without really breaking character. He does get a little bit choked up towards the end, but he doesn't cry or go into hysterics like most of the palace rulers, and heck, even Alice did to an extent. That makes him feel quite mature, which is very good characterization already. But then after this, Yusuke and Joker barge in on the press conference, and Yusuke refuses to accept Natsume ending his writing career. Yusuke demands Natsume keep writing, make a book that he can be proud of as a writer, and leave his own name on it, not his grandfather's. And once that time comes, both Yusuke and Joker will be first in line to read it. Joker agrees, telling him to do his very best. This disgraced author, who assumed no one really cared about anything he put on a page, finally has two people who really, truly believe in him. And that is what finally causes him to break down. Support, not guilt, is what got to Natsume. This is what makes him cry. That is how you write a sympathetic villain without making it feel like a waste. The payoff here is simple, yes, and yet it is so effective because everything about Natsume's story is so tightly written around the emotional resolution. I suppose you could say the same for Mariko all the way back in last place, but the key difference to me is that it never feels like the player is rushed into feeling sympathetic for him. I'm fully aware that this is pretty subjective, but this is my ranking after all, and Natsume just works so much better than Mariko does for me. I don't want to oversell it. Sendai's Jail isn't some masterpiece or anything, but this arc really is just so solid in terms of writing, and in the game that is already, on the whole, very solid, that's quite impressive. Am I biased because I think Yusuke is one of the best party members Atlus has made in decades? Yes! Thank you for asking. But that only equates to a small part of why I think this jail works so well. Yusuke is just a key piece of the puzzle that makes the writing of this arc so wonderful and cohesive, creating the best normal jail in the game by a significant margin. Number 2. Kyoto's Jail, Akane Hasegawa. Man, the setup for this jail is fucking awesome, as long as you surgically remove the stupid character assassination hot spring scene. I know it's really short and doesn't matter at all, but come on guys, I really thought the series was better than this by now. Regardless, that's a non-issue. This jail is honestly near perfect. I love how much higher the stakes have become, with police hunting the thieves in the real world and Konoe is still in complete control of the situation. Akane having a jail hits especially hard, considering how the decent amount of time we spent with her before the Okinawa excursion really went a long way towards endearing us to her character. So in a way, that's another point for Okinawa's jail. If it hadn't had the visit to Kyoto to see Akane, this part of the game would work significantly less well. Even the stealth section that opens this jail isn't half bad. It's pretty short, which makes it less frustrating if you mess up, and it mostly just boils down to waiting for the right moment to very inelegantly run between cover points like an average human being, instead of using the phantom dash that the thieves get, because at this point, Zenkichi is just an average person. But it also, obviously, is goddamn hilarious. On that note, I'd just like to point out how Zenkichi is, to my knowledge, the only non-Persona user to simply survive this long in any form of the collective unconsciousness, much less enter it willingly, knowing full well that he has no real way to defend himself. And yet he does it anyway, because he has people he wants to protect. That's kind of awesome, honestly. But of course, Zenkichi isn't left defenseless for long.
Condemn the evil and hunt them down.
I'm gonna level with you. Even if everything else about this arc was, like, bottom of the barrel awful, as long as Zenkichi's role was intact, that alone would probably be enough to push it above the halfway mark. Zenkichi has been struggling with which side to take for nearly the entire game. Does he take the easy way out and side with the law, or does he throw his lot in with the Phantom Thieves and pursue what he knows is right? Now, with his tolerance already stretched to the breaking point from essentially turning his back on the police to save the Phantom Thieves, when he discovers that his daughter has a jail, and a great deal of the catalyst for said jail was his own negligence to do what deep down he knows is right for her, that is finally too much for him to bear without taking action, and it leads to one of the most cathartic scenes in any video game I've ever played, not even just the Persona series. I just like to take this moment to compliment the designers because Zenkichi and Valjean fit into Persona 5's style and tone so seamlessly. It's like they were there all along. My only complaint is that Zenkichi doesn't have an ultimate persona, but judging by this game's structure, that would have been pretty impossible to incorporate unless they went back to Persona 3's way of doing things. Maybe in the next Persona 5 game, whatever and whenever that may be. It's just so gratifying to finally see Zenkichi go fucking apeshit the way he always should have been able to, and I really do mean that. He kind of does go actually insane in battle. Like, Akechi would be proud if he was here to see this. I miss him. Kyoto's jail feels like a bizarre mixture of Dojima's social link from Persona 4 plus Futaba's palace from the original Persona 5, which sounds insane on paper, but it honestly works. It really, really works, and I couldn't be happier about it. When you think about it, Zenkichi is kind of just the heart and soul of Persona 5 Strikers. If he was not here, this game would be that 8 out of 10 spin-off game I was expecting it to be. He adds so much just by being a fresh face with a new idea for a party member, and he's just, oh, he's so good. I love him. I love Zenkichi. Thank you. Thank you. Also, Tom Taylorson fucking kills this role. He is so good. I want him in more things. I want him to be known as more than just Octodad. He is so good. Anyways, as if the writing wasn't enough for you, the gameplay is fun, the mini-bosses are getting more interesting and cool. I actually really like the Neko Shogun fight. Zenkichi is absolutely captivating to finally play as, and I feel like it's kind of pointless to even mention the music at this point because you know it's good. It's Striker's music. Come on! Also, the boss fight is really fun. I've always liked fighting characters with the exact same capabilities as you in games, and this time I think it was executed really well. I love how Akane's Joker just does not give a fuck about you and will not hesitate to run your ass into the ground if you get knocked down. The only problem with Akane's special hell is that it's really short. It's a real shame that there's no fully explorable area of Kyoto, though I understand why there can't be considering the police activity, and I feel like they could have done a lot more with the concept that they used for the boss fight, but this jail just gets so much else right that I can't complain too much, especially with Zenkichi. It really cannot be overstated how overwhelmingly cool it is. This jail being in second place owes a pretty significant debt to this awesome old man.
You're just mad Omega Force stole your cognitive fan of Thieves idea, aren't you?
Shut up! Number 1. Osaka's Jail. Akira Konoe. When I was playing this game, I totally thought Akira Konoe would just be a boring retread of Shido from Persona 5. I thought he would be exactly the same person, a mastermind who just wants to use the jails to gain power over the country and generally be a huge asshole. And, following the trend of how this game treats my pessimistic expectations, I have never been more wrong in my life. Akira Konoe is an actual fucking badass. Don't get me wrong, this game has a boring retread of Shido with Jun Iwata, but he barely matters in the grand scheme of things. He's not even a real character, he's just a guy who stands to benefit from changes of heart. Iwata is not the antagonistic focus of this game by any stretch, Konoe is. This man is so fucking cool that he is the only Shadow Self in the entire Persona series who is fully capable of combat without the use of minions or transforming into a monster. All he needs is his hero suit and a cool sword, and that's good enough for him. He does have a mech suit, but the fact that he's actually way more threatening after he's destroyed makes me think he uses it to handicap himself, just so things are fair. It also has to be said how he marks the first appearance of Counter-Strike, aka this game's climactic Rivers in the Desert type fight song, and goddamn, this shit might be right alongside it. They're both just that good. I love how the game hits you with this awesome remix of Rivers in the Desert for the first phase, and they're like, okay, that's cool, I'm satisfied on the music front, and then they're like, nah, psych, we made our own version, bro, and then you're just knocked on your fucking ass because the music is so good, dude. It's Lotus Juice and Lin. What more can you want? Also, the gameplay and design of this dungeon, absolutely unparalleled. You can tell that this was a jail the developers really decided to go all out on, and it's incredible. There's straight up better versions of mechanics from previous jails, like the literal gating in the form of the ice walls in Sapporo's jail that just serve to keep you from going to the areas out of order. Yeah, those are in Osaka's jail in the form of the camera traps, but instead of just gating progression, they're littered all over the map, so turning them off not only allows you to continue forward, but makes backtracking much easier. Genius. The enemies in this jail in particular are where I started to notice regular battles really starting to push back. Not just the mini-bosses, I was a bit caught off guard with how really capable those Ganeshas were of killing me. It's a noticeable step up in challenge, but it feels appropriate for this stage of the game, and it's not so big a difficulty spike so as to feel unfair. The environmental mechanics of this jail are really fun too, especially like the massive fucking railguns and the luggage carts in the airport, which are basically wind versions of the skateboards from Shibuya's jail, except this time the level design is much longer and narrower, allowing you to just barrel straight through all the wind-weak nagas that the game pops up in your way. It's so much fun. This was the first full-length jail where I could make full use of my squad that I straight up just used for the rest of the run, consisting of Joker, Ryuji, Yusuke, and then Kichi. Don't get me wrong, I love all the Phantom Thief girls as characters, but in terms of combat, they may as well just not exist anymore, because everyone knows the best way to take down violent, zealous anti-heroes is with the boys! And even though the dudes at Omega Force made the gameplay and enemies and boss of this jail the best of the game, they didn't want to stop there, so they just went ahead and made the best villain in the game too. Akira Konoe is exempt from my previous grievances with the formulaic nature of the other jails, because for me, it never felt like his backstory was meant to make you sympathize with him. He does fucking kill his father after all. It's just there to show how he came to view the world in this way and how his beliefs became so unshakable. And like, can we talk about that? This man's beliefs are so firm that his shadow self looks exactly like his self in reality, bar the classic golden eyes, which, at least in the Persona 5 games, I think that's a first out of any of the major villains. Even Shido eventually transforms into Senator Armstrong partway through his boss fight, but Konoe is having none of that. The reason Konoe works so well is that everything about his character has been specifically designed to put him directly at odds with the Phantom Thieves. He's a rival character, but not in the same sense as Akechi was in Persona 5 Royal. While Akechi was a rival figure to Joker and only Joker, Konoe is everything that the Phantom Thieves as a group are not. Konoe's childhood hero, Zephyr Man, is a single superhero who goes around saving the world on his own, which is a stark contrast to the more well-known Feather Man and their teamwork. This mindset grew up with Konoe, and now he believes that he is literally the only hero capable of helping the world, which inherently has him take up an opposing stance towards the thieves and their whole power of friendship thing. That is awesome. And there's more Featherman lore. If you need any more convincing that this game is a true Persona game and not just a spin-off, here you go. Here is undeniable proof. Konoe is incredibly smart because he is such a sequel character. The Phantom Thieves are established as a group now. They know their niche. So now what happens when someone equally confident in himself steps up and boldly challenges everything they stand for? He brings up so many legitimate questions about the way the Phantom Thieves work and how they can't save everyone that eventually you can't help but agree with him to an extent. Konoe may be doing bad things, but he's doing them out of the desire for no one else to have to go through what he did. Konoe wants to be the hero that was never there for him, and that's so good, man. I am so fucking tired of that tropified version of an anti-hero as someone who's basically just a villain, but they're edgy, so they get called an anti-hero. So to see a return to form with someone who does see themselves as a hero, but does things in a bad way, is just so unbelievably refreshing for me. Konoe feels like an older, more mature version of Akechi, honestly. It really feels like there are intentional parallels here, with Konoe working with Awada but secretly wanting to get rid of him, mirroring Akechi's situation with Shido, but Akechi isn't here. So I really couldn't tell you why they went this direction. I'm not exactly complaining though, it's still pretty neat, but I want him back. Also, I kind of love Konoe's plan too. He kills his father, and then he creates Medice. He gets this jail thing, and he's like, okay, I killed my father. He was a bad guy. So now I'm just going to fucking kill all of the bad guys. He changes the hearts of everyone he can, and kills those he can't, all in service of the goal of just becoming one guy who saved the entire world. I feel like I don't even need to explain why that's amazing. Honestly, I wonder how it would have worked if they had swapped the final jail with this one and had an inversion of the twist from the original Persona 5, with the god being the fake-out final boss for once. That would be weird as hell and probably wouldn't work at all, but the idea of the final boss of this game just being a single dude who wants to change the world all by himself sounds fucking awesome on paper. That leads into the complaint I mentioned at the beginning of this video though. If Konoe just had 30% more story presence, I really think I would be one of... Did I really write I would be one of the best villains of all time? I mean, I guess after my Persona 4 video, I guess I am one of the best villains of all time. I'm the villain of the Persona fandom. Anyways, what I mean is, if Konoe had just had 30% more story presence, I really think he would have been one of the best villains of all time. I'm not exaggerating at all. I think he does basically everything a high-level antagonist should do pretty darn well, and if he had just had more time for his personal story to be explored a tiny bit more and established himself as a pure badass even more than he already does, then he would honestly just be perfect. Regardless, his placement and role in the story doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because Konoe is still a really good villain. If I had one more complaint about him, it's that I do wish he was a tiny bit less campy. The boss fight cutscenes make up for it in pure big dick energy, but some of his other lines make it a little more difficult for me to take him as seriously as I'd like. But that's honestly a minor issue. It's only just a personal thing. He's still stellar. His ranking shuffled around a lot as I was writing it, but for the whole time, there was never any doubt in my mind that Osaka's jail would always remain number one. It's just so consistent in terms of quality. While Kyoto's jail has a slightly higher high in Zenkichi's Awakening, and I do mean slightly, this and Konoe's boss fight are locked in a heated battle for the top spot as we speak. The overall great quality of Osaka's jail, though, combined with an astounding penultimate villain, makes an unbeatable double team that easily landed this jail first place. What an outstanding arc, with a memorable, no, an unforgettable villain that deserves to be talked about way more. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're just now discovering the channel, welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay. If you stuck around from the Persona 4 video, I can't thank you enough for doing so. How to do in my second video. I tried to cut myself off in a lot of places to keep this video from getting bloated in comparison to the Persona 4 one, where I mostly just let myself dump everything out because I needed to make a much more complete and rounded argument. While I may have been hopelessly naive to assume I was going to finish editing the Persona 4 video before Strikers came out, I was surprised at how comparatively quickly this one came together once I finished the game. Probably because, it's not 2.5 hours long. Anyways, thank you for watching. I'm honestly not opposed to doing another video on Strikers in the future, actually, because there's a lot of pretty cool stuff in here that could be explored more, like basically just Zenkichi. But my next video is going to be a little different from these two, actually, but still Persona related for the time being. I hope you can stick around to see that one when it comes out, too. Thanks, everyone, for clicking, for watching, for skipping to the end to ask why Sapporo's jail wasn't number 1. Thanks for everything. Stay safe out there. See you when I see you. Bye, y'all.